What remains of William Wallace's execution today is not blood, not clothing, not any physical object capable of surviving 7 centuries of London's wind. What survives is far more disturbing: a scattered set of administrative records, late medieval testimonies, and fragmented notes that, when pieced together, reveal a sequence of events very different from the official version. Among these documents, one in particular continues to puzzle modern historians. A damaged entry in the Pipe Roll, an accounting record from the reign of Edward I, mentioning extraordinary adjustments to the apparatus of the judgment and additional costs for preparing the place of execution. The expense list never explains why, but it does describe the construction of an auxiliary structure near Smithfield, a secondary platform not seen in any other treason sentence. What purpose did it serve? It wasn't common. It wasn't required. And no one ever explained why it was built. Another unsettling clue appears in a small set of notes attributed to a county official, references to a repositioned crowd, altered procedures, and an order coming directly from the palace. None of these expressions match the typical vocabulary of routine executions, and all of them contradict the official narrative that Wallace was killed according to the standard ritual for traitors. When modern historians study the route between Westminster Hall and Smithfield, something unusual stands out. The path taken by the escort was neither the fastest, the straightest, nor the most logical. Mapping it reveals a deliberate detour, weaving through specific districts of the city as if there were an underlying objective. Perhaps exhibition, perhaps intimidation, perhaps something even more calculated. But the most unsettling clue comes from a document written decades after his death. A late account collected by a London chronicler describing an uncommon instrument used that morning, something found in no English execution manual of the time. The chronicler provides no shape, no mechanism, only the chilling remark that it was not usual among us. The omission, more than any description, is what troubles scholars today. If Wallace's execution followed protocol, why do so many surviving records describe it as an exception? Why were extra structures built? Why did officials record confidential orders? What was this instrument, mentioned once and then erased from the record? And most importantly, what exactly happened during that detour, away from the public eye, that the Crown paid for, but refused to explain? To understand the weight of William Wallace's final hours, we must first understand who had actually been captured in the summer of 1305, and why his death demanded a spectacle so calculated that it still unsettles modern historians. Wallace was not just a military commander. For the fragmented Scotland of the late 13th century, he represented something far more dangerous to the English crown. Living proof that a man without title, without noble lineage, and without royal sanction could challenge an entire empire and win. His victory at Stirling Bridge was not merely military, it was symbolic. When the English army collapsed before a leader who was never meant to exist, a political ghost was born, one that even Edward I, experienced, ruthless, and strategic, never managed to exorcise. England, meanwhile, lived in a state of permanent tension. Edward I's reign was marked by successive wars, financial strain, religious disputes, and chronic internal conflicts among nobles. Entire families fled starvation after years of unstable harvests. The throne desperately needed to reaffirm its authority, Any sign of weakness could be interpreted as an invitation to rebellion. Within this context, Wallace was not just a military enemy. He was an inconvenient symbol at a time when symbols were worth as much as armies. His capture offered Edward I a rare opportunity to demonstrate to his own people that no rebel, no resistance leader, no matter how powerful, could survive the weight of royal power. The problem is that the surviving records disagree with the official narrative. The traditional version claims Wallace was tried, convicted, and executed according to standard ritual. But behind-the-scenes documentation, magistrates' letters, scribes' notes, foreign ambassadors' reports, contains too many inconsistencies to ignore. Some letters mention direct pressures from the court. Others speak of sudden adjustments to the ritual. There are even references to sealed orders delivered before dawn, altering traditional protocols. More disturbing still is the fact that two different versions of the official indictment were circulating in London. One list portrayed Wallace as a common criminal. The other insisted on announcing him as a usurper, a claimant to a crown he never actually sought. The reason for these conflicting narratives remains obscure, and no surviving manuscript offers a convincing explanation. And then there is the silence. Silence in places where silence should not exist. While other records show the natural disorder of medieval bureaucracy, Wallace's documentation appears suspiciously clean, rehearsed. What is missing is not text, but the human truth behind the legal wording. Entire days go unrecorded. Notes have been erased. Blank spaces appear in the administrative rolls, as if someone removed parts of the narrative before it was archived. This cluster of anomalies leads modern historians to ask, did the English state need to kill a man? Or did it need to erase something he represented? Once we place these pieces on the table, we see clearly that the drama played out in Westminster and concluded at Smithfield did not begin that day. It had been constructed over years, carefully fueled by politics, fear, and a desperate need for control. And now that the doors of this investigation have been opened, we must move to the heart of the dossier. Why William Wallace had to die in that specific manner, and who truly benefited from the spectacle. When the official English records describe the capture and execution of William Wallace, they repeat the same justification over and over: treason against the king. But to any modern historian reviewing the archives of the period, especially fiscal rolls, administrative correspondence, and letters exchanged between barons close to Edward I, that explanation sounds less like legal truth and more like a political curtain. The real motive was not in the courtroom. It was in the growing panic of the English crown. In 1305, Edward I faced a disastrous scenario. His war against France was draining resources. Internal rebellions challenged royal authority. The country was in debt, and defeated soldiers returning from the north brought unsettling stories about a Scot who fought with uncommon ferocity. Wallace, even after later setbacks, remained a living symbol of resistance. And the greatest threat to a king is not an army, it is an icon. For Edward, allowing Wallace to live, even in hiding, meant allowing the spark of rebellion to remain lit. Capturing the Scot would not only resolve a military problem, it would resolve a psychological one. To publicly destroy the man who had humiliated the English army at Stirling Bridge. The surviving documents, especially letters from ambassadors sent to Rome, and administrative dispatches from the Scottish border reveal something disturbing. The Scottish nobles who had sworn loyalty to the English king feared Wallace as much as Edward did. His existence exposed their cowardice. The simple fact that he remained free was a constant reminder that there was still one man willing to face English power without kneeling. For many of these nobles, delivering Wallace meant purchasing their own survival. And it is in this game of fragile alliances, espionage spread across taverns, and exorbitant rewards that the true motive of Wallace's trial emerges. It was not a legal proceeding. It was a political purification, an expulsion. The state needed a sacrifice, and Wallace had been chosen to fulfill that role. The bureaucratic trap. The net that closed around William Wallace was not the result of a dramatic clash in battle. It was the result of documents, reneged oaths, and sealed letters rushed to London. Sir John Menteith, the man often blamed for the betrayal, appears in the sources as an ambiguous figure. In some narratives, he is the direct agent of Wallace's delivery. In others, he seems to have acted under higher orders and under threat of losing lands and titles. The truth remains hidden in the silences of the chronicles, and perhaps therein lies the answer. Edward possessed a vast espionage network, informants in churches, inns, marketplaces, and even within the homes of families who had supported Wallace at the start of the rebellion. That is the crucial point. The enemy was not the English army, but the English administrative machine, which needed only a single opportunity to capture its target. The trap was not grand or heroic. It was bureaucratic, silent, crawling beneath the surface. Expense records from the period mention unusual payments to messengers sent from the north. One of these entries coincides with the date of Wallace's capture. Modern historians interpret this as evidence of a carefully coordinated operation. First, isolate Wallace, then inform London, and finally surround him with troops loyal to the king. Wallace's fatal mistake? Trusting those around him. The betrayal, according to some chronicles, may have come from Jack Short, a close servant. Other versions claim Menteith merely took advantage of a moment of vulnerability. What matters is that Wallace did not fall in battle. He fell in trust. He did not die due to martial failure, but because of a system that wore him down until he was surrounded by pointed fingers, closed doors, and silent supposed allies. His capture in August 1305 sealed the fate that had been decided long before, not in the courtroom, but in offices, in exchanges of favors, in political negotiations that would never be officially recorded. If the evidence so far has stirred something in you, mark your presence with a like, join our hidden circle by subscribing, and ring the bell so the court keeps you summoned as this case descends into its darker layers. Forensic reconstruction of the crime. The execution of William Wallace was recorded with unusual detail for the 14th century, not because the English wished to preserve the memory of the Scotsman, but because they wanted to create a model of exemplary punishment. That record, ironically and tragically, is what allows modern historians to reconstruct his final hours step by step. First, the dragged journey through London. Contemporary historiography sees this route not as mere humiliation, but as the initial phase of the method of death. Dragging the condemned for miles on stone-paved streets was not just political theater. It was a functional part of the execution. Every movement of the body against the uneven ground produced abrasions, fractures, and tissue loss. In forensic terms, it was designed to induce prolonged shock. The use of the hurdle, the wooden platform, was not mercy. It was technique. It allowed the condemned to remain conscious. The next stage, suspension by the neck, was not intended to break the cervical spine, as would be typical in later centuries. Chronicles clearly state that Wallace was removed from the rope before the fatal moment. This planned interruption aligns with medieval ritual execution, bringing the condemned to the brink of death, yet keeping him alive for the stages that followed. Medical studies on medieval hanging indicate that when lifted without sufficient height for neck rupture, the body enters progressive hypoxia. Consciousness fades in and out. Sensory perception distorts. In Wallace's case, this served a purpose. He was meant to witness his own fate, not as a fallen warrior, but as a prisoner reduced to fragile matter. The evisceration stage, in turn, was described with precision in English chronicles. There is no fantasy. This procedure was a known practice applied only to those accused of high treason. Accounts mention thin, sharp instruments consistent with blades used by professional executioners of the era. The extraction of the viscera was not performed with wild brutality, but methodically, keeping the condemned alive for as long as possible. The final beheading, despite its legendary aura, was likely imperfect on the first blow, as some sources suggest. This does not indicate incompetence by the executioner, but the practical difficulty of decapitating a body already subjected to severe trauma. The final stage, the quartering, was the most bureaucratic of all. Each part of the body sent to a specific destination fulfilled the intended political message, transforming the rebel's body into a map of warning scattered across the kingdom. From an archaeological documentary perspective, no bone fragments have been definitively attributed to Wallace, but administrative records confirm the transport of human remains to strategic towns. These dry, cold accounting notes reveal the truth. Wallace's death was less an execution and more an engineering of psychological control intended to shape an entire population. The executioner's signature, hanging, drawing, and quartering, the English triple ritual, was not merely punishment. It was a narrative of power. Modern historians point to three symbolic elements at the core of this method. Public exposure. Transforming death into spectacle asserted that the state could not only take lives, but control how those lives would be remembered. Destruction of the body. Denying meaningful burial was a strategy of cultural erasure. For a people who revered their dead, refusing sepulture was refusing identity. Dispersal of the parts. The final act of the signature, scattering the condemned throughout the kingdom, turning the body into a permanent political message. Edward the Forster did not simply want to eliminate William Wallace. He wanted to disfigure him, fragment him, disperse him, and ensure his memory dissolved. It was an aesthetic of violence far more sophisticated than physical cruelty. It was communication. The execution was a calculated performance, a visual assertion of power meant to convert Wallace into taboo. But the symbolism, designed to destroy a man, ended up strengthening his legend. Post-crime, the management of memory. For many modern historians, the phase after the execution is the most revealing part of the Wallace case, because it exposes not only how the English wanted him to be seen, but how they failed. Wallace's head, preserved with rudimentary methods, was placed atop London Bridge. His remains were sent to specific towns. All of it was planned to break Scottish morale. But something happened that Edward IV did not anticipate. People began to visit those sites clandestinely. Soldiers guarding the body parts reported objects left behind: small branches, tokens, symbolic markings made on the ground. Not religious symbols, political ones. That was the beginning of the myth. When some of the remains eventually disappeared, removed by authorities or possibly retrieved secretly by supporters, the official English silence only fueled rumors. And rumor, in medieval societies, was a force more powerful than any royal decree. Consequences. The political effect was immediate. Far from intimidating Scotland, Wallace's death ignited it. Robert the Bruce, who had wavered between submission and rebellion, became the central figure of the independence movement. For modern historians, this point is crucial. The psychological impact of Wallace's execution was so profound that it altered the course of Scottish politics. The official English version described Wallace as a bloodthirsty criminal. But the backstage records, soldiers' accounts from the execution, letters sent by witnesses to distant nobles, and documents from later chroniclers reveal something else: discomfort, repulsion, and even involuntary admiration. This contradiction is the core of the case. The execution, planned as the final blow, became the seed of resistance. The destroyed body of Wallace became the symbolic foundation of a nation that refused to disappear. Modern historians continue to debate details: whether Wallace truly spoke his attributed final words, whether certain gestures were intentional or exaggerated. But all agree on one thing: no other medieval rebel had a death so meticulously engineered, nor an impact so enduring. When modern historians revisit the final hours of William Wallace, they are not merely trying to reconstruct the sequence of a medieval torment. They are trying to understand how one destroyed body became the turning point of a war, an identity, and a collective memory that refused to die with him. And as they cross-examine period letters, English chronicles, administrative records, and later accounts, they all reach the same unsettling conclusion. Wallace's execution was not justice. It was political engineering. The tribunal that condemned him did not judge him for crimes, but for existing. To London, his very stubbornness posed a greater threat than any sword. And paradoxically, the method chosen to erase him from history produced the opposite effect. It turned his death into the most powerful document of the entire Scottish rebellion. The destruction of the body, designed to disperse meaning, ended up uniting a people. The public display, meant to humiliate, ended up inspiring reverence. The attempt to erase ended up creating a martyr. Scholars who walk today through Westminster Hall, Smithfield, or the former site of London Bridge describe a sensation that is difficult to name. It is not merely historical weight. It is a kind of residual presence, as if the echo of those who watched Wallace resist erasure still vibrates in the stone. The official version, polished by English propaganda, never managed to silence the parallel testimonies of soldiers, monks, and travelers who witnessed something profoundly disturbing in that execution. A man who, even before the most meticulous system of state destruction, refused to bend. That is why Wallace's death remains unforgettable. Not because of the suffering, common in medieval justice, but because that suffering failed to break what truly mattered, his refusal to recognize as sovereign the very man who condemned him. 7 centuries later, his end still haunts historians because it exposes an uncomfortable truth. When power tries to control memory through violence, it sometimes creates exactly what it fears the most. And so, in the records, in the stones, and in the narrative that survived the centuries, one final image remains: a body reduced to fragments, and a spirit no tribunal could judge, no executioner could silence, and no king could bury. If this investigation left echoes in your mind, deliver your verdict with a like, swear your presence by subscribing to the archive, and ring the bell so the court may summon you when the next forbidden case is unsealed.